One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Okay, so if you were listening to this episode in real time, we are officially at the end of 2020. Like today is December 31st, 2020. And if you would have told me in March of 2020, when the world just went nuts, right? And you would have said, you will make it to the end of the year, I probably would have looked at you and laughed and said, what are you talking about? We are living in a zombie apocalypse movie. Like that is what's coming. And like, I just don't even know what this year is going to hold. Like, oh my gosh. So first of all, quick reference on the zombie apocalypse movies. Okay. I've seen so many of them. This is like, it's not really one of my obsessions. Like I've had people ask me, have you ever watched The Walking Dead? And I'm like, no, it doesn't. For whatever reason, that show doesn't appeal to me. However, I have seen World War Z. I mean, come on, it's got Brad Pitt in it. It was an incredible zombie movie. I've seen all the ones with, what is it? It's Resident Evil. I've seen all of those. Those were fantastic. I love Game of Thrones and the Night Walkers. Like, oh my gosh, like, oh, I could just, don't even get me started on Game of Thrones. I've thought about creating a podcast just dedicated to Game of Thrones because I am a huge super fan of the show. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. I may have rewatched every single episode again this year because hashtag 2020, right? I mean, like it's fine. It's fine. We're all fine. We made it to the end of this year. But to reference the zombie apocalypse, like it's so funny because I think back to, we were on spring break in March of 2020 when everything first started happening, and we were, they were talking about closing schools, like it might not open. And we're like, what? Like, what are they even talking about? And this was at the end of our spring break trip. And I called my parents and I was talking to them, and my dad had the exact same thought that I did. He said, this is the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. And I was like, see, like I'm not the only one. And my husband looked at me like I was crazy and was like, okay, wait, never mind. I get it. You and your dad are both crazy. And I'm like, yeah, it's just whatever. Anyway, this was the longest introduction to tell you that I'm a huge fan of zombie movies for whatever reason. I guess I get it from my dad, right? She get it from my daddy. That was terrible reference. Anyway, the thing is, I'm cracking up because this year should end in a totally nonsensical episode because it's what 2020 is waiting for, right? Like it wasn't expecting professionalism and like why should Crystal start being super professional in the last episode of 2020? That just it's not on brand, okay? It's not going to happen. If that's what you were expecting, I'm sorry. You're going to be very disappointed in this episode. But I am going to share with you my intentions for this podcast going into 2021, because if you're listening later, I promise there's going to be some really good nuggets of wisdom. But if you're listening in real time, I just wanted to throw a little something at you. That way you would get it. You would understand in real time what is going on. But let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, maybe I will or will not reference any more zombie movies during this episode. We'll see. I'm not making any promises because I can't do that. But I will tell you that my intentions for the podcast going into the next 12 months are very different than what they were going into 2020, because believe it or not, like maybe you're just like me and you had plans for 20. You're like, 2020 is going to be my year. I see it happening. Like this is going to be it. I had the vision board. I had all the things that told me 2020 was going to be my year. And I have to tell you, there were definitely so many things I learned in 2020. First of all, I started a daily podcast that just crossed the 200 mark too. So at this point, I have 2 separate podcasts, and combined together, we have over 400 podcast episodes. That is insane. That is just totally bonkers. Like if you would have told me that in January 2020, that I would have already created more than 400 podcast episode, I would have just been like, you done lost your mind. What are we even talking about? But that is something that happened this year. The Potty Report, my daily podcast, did not even exist until we launched on March 28th of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And it just it's so crazy because now I look back and I'm like, I cannot imagine not having my daily show. So if you didn't even know about it, yes, I have a podcast that I produce Monday through Friday. It comes out every week and it's 5 minutes or less. And it has a mixture of just shenanigans. It's sometimes rants on what's going on or where I'm frustrated or where I see podcasters getting frustrated. Sometimes if I release a new tool or there's an update, I will usually put it there first because that's like the time, like more time sensitive material. I'll tell you about it on the Potty Report, and then usually I'll do a deeper dive on the Profit Podcast. But the first thing that I'm going to do or talk about and going into 2021 is experimenting. And the reason why I talked about the Potty Report first is because that's really what that was. If I'm just being totally honest, in March, I got a little nervous and I was like, I need to kind of shake things up. I need to shake things up because I was launching my membership in March and I thought, well, I want to have almost like a test kitchen, right? I'm a huge fan of cooking. I'm kind of like a home chef. I like to try things out and experiment. And every good cook needs a test kitchen, right? Whether you're cooking for yourself, you're cooking for friends and family, whatever that looks like, you need to try new recipes. You need to try new things and not be afraid if they fail, right? If it's a total flop, if it just doesn't work out, you need to just try new things and not be afraid of them. And so I was a little nervous to take the Profit Podcast and start pumping out a ton of content without knowing it would work or not. And because of the dynamic of the Potty Report being 5-minute episodes, it's 5 minutes or less, and it's Monday through Friday, it just seemed like a whole bunch of content to throw at one audience. And so in using that as an experiment, I realized that audience is still different from this audience, because maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, I want the long form content. And maybe you listen to this show and you listen to that show. And I so appreciate it. Like if you listen to any of my podcasts, I absolutely appreciate it. I'm so grateful for those of you that tune in every single week. But with that podcast, I realized that a lot of those people that listen to that show just want the short form content. Maybe that's all they can handle. Maybe they're just getting into podcasting and they're kind of nervous about like, I don't know, like I want little bite-sized tips. I want little bitty things that I can digest. That way I know I'll feel ready to either transition to listening to more or exploring more or watching some training videos or whatever that looks like for you. I get it. But had I not experimented at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't have stumbled upon that information or a different segment of this audience. So I'm so grateful for experimenting this year, and I know I'm going to take that into the new year. So what does that look like? What does experimenting with a podcast look like? Because I know there's a lot of y'all, a good majority of this audience. So I've learned, right? And you can take this however you want, but I am constantly trying to understand my audience better. I am obsessed with you in like the most like uncreepy way possible. I am so obsessed with understanding what my audience wants, what you need, and how I can help you reach your goals. And the number one thing that I have found this year is just sharing the behind the scenes. Like y'all are all about it. You're like, yes, please, and thank you. Show us all the things behind the scenes. And so I know going into the new year, I want to do more bonus episodes. This is one thing that I recently did a podcast episode about. If you haven't seen that episode, I'm going to link to it in the show notes. So crystalprofit.com/episode 216. I'm going to link to the recent podcast episode about bonus episodes, but I don't do a ton of those on this podcast. And the reason why is because I feel like I already put out enough content, right? We already publish twice a week, and I don't want to bombard you. I never want you to come to your phone or wherever you're listening to this, if it's on your tablet or if it's on your Alexa device, wherever you're listening. I never want you to say, oh my gosh, like Crystal put out 5 episodes all of a sudden, and I don't know which one to start with. This one's 5 minutes, this one's 15 minutes, that one's 30 minutes. It's too much. I just shut down. I'm just not going to listen to these episodes anymore. I never want that to happen. But the reason why I know that happens is because I've had that happen to me as a podcast listener. Like maybe I didn't have a chance to listen for 1 week, and then I come back and it's like, oh my gosh, they put out like 5 episodes. I don't even know which ones to start with, and I'm not really interested in some of these topics. And then I think I'll just go on to someone else that I'm more interested in, and then I don't go back to that episode, or I don't go back to that podcast. So I do understand that there are seasonalities when it comes to your listeners, because this happens for everybody. Like there's times, like perfect example, over the holidays where I didn't do as much podcast listening as I thought I would because I was spending time with my kids. I was spending time with my family. Like most of the time when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm either working out or I'm folding clothes, I'm cooking, I'm doing some other things. But since the kids have been home, I've been spending time with them and it's been such a blessing. But going into the new year, I know that I want to do more bonus episodes, but this actually rolls into the next piece of experimenting, and that's I want to be more strategic. And believe it or not, I already find myself pretty strategic already. I have my content calendar very fine-tuned and planned out. This is really crazy. I already finished Q1 of the new year. Like it is set. And I'm already working in Q2, and you can do this as well. And again, that's me publishing twice a week. Like I'm already going into the month of April and planning content for 2021. So I am already pretty strategic in how I set things up with my podcast, but I really want to dial it in. My word for 2021 is focus, and I just want to get so specific that I don't have a bunch of fluffy stuff within the episodes that you're just like, Crystal, what is this even about? Now, let me back up for a second, okay? Because that does not mean that I'm taking out my personality, okay? Like that's one thing is I cannot show up here and be authentic with you and not talk about my love of, zombie movies. I was about to say vampire movies, and I'm like, wait, hang on. I do not like vampire movies for the record. I didn't get into the Twilight stuff. It wasn't my jam. It wasn't my thing. The books, I would just look at the books and they were so thick. And I'm like, that's not going to work. The first time I saw the Game of Thrones book, I was my husband and I went to Colombia in 2017 and we were in the airport. And that was the first time I'd seen the Game of Thrones, the first book in person, and it was in Spanish. But I was like, oh my gosh, it's so big. And I tried to read it on the ebook version so I didn't feel so intimidated, and it just didn't work for me. So I don't do the really long books, which is why I'm not a fan of the Twilight stuff. Anyway, look, see what I'm talking about? There's still going to be shenanigans in the podcast episodes, but I want to be strategic with what we talk about in every single episode. So this is a lesson for any podcasters out there. As you create content, don't be afraid to be yourself. So many people feel that they have to be rigid and okay, I'm going to show up, I'm going to record my podcast. I have 5 things to teach, and I'm only going to talk about, okay, step number 1, you do this. Step number 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're done. That was a 5-minute episode. And I'm like, yeah, but did you talk about anything that you like? Or did you talk about one of your own quirks or one of your own mistakes or something that's actually interesting, right? Because if I want to be lectured, okay, let's go back to college or even high school or even junior college. And you're just like, oh my gosh, they're up at the front of the room talking and I could care less about what they're saying. I never want anybody to listen to this podcast and feel that way, ever, 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 ever. And I don't want people to listen to your podcast and feel that way. But if all you're trying to do is throw facts and figures and information at your guest, that's kind of how it's going to come across. But I know a lot of you are just thinking, well, I just got to plan this information, sit down really uncomfortable in front of the microphone and just start talking, and I'm going to sound like a freaking robot, or I'm going to sound awkward or weird, and it's going to make me nervous and uncomfortable, and I just want to do it. And I'm just like, stop the madness. Just be yourself. Stop making it so damn complicated. It is not that hard. It is not that hard. Do you hear the things that I'm talking about on this podcast? Okay, we've talked about zombie movies and vampire movies in this episode. You've heard, if you've listened to the show for a while, you've heard all my other shenanigans. I talk about laundry. I talk about my kids. I talk about, conversations I have with my husband. You don't have to give everybody your social security number. It's not like you have to get super personal and tell them what you ate for dinner last night. But I do want you to infuse your personality into your podcast, because that is what keeps people coming back, okay? It's not your facts and your figures that they can find on Google, right? It's not you just sitting down and explaining to them the one thing that they know. I want you to create something that is a habit, right? Like this should be your intention for 2021. If you are creating a podcast, I want it to be so good that people are automatically looking for your show, right? The podcast drops. Let's say your podcast comes out on a Tuesday. Tuesday morning, people are grabbing their phone saying, did the podcast from Kathy come out this week? Or did I see one from Angelica? Did Brittany put her show out? Like, these are the things that I want your listeners talking about for your show. I want them asking, is that new episode out? Like, is it ready? Has it dropped? Because one, you're being consistent with your show. Two, they know that it's going to be there and they're excited to listen to it. I want your people to get excited to listen to your show because I'm going to be really honest. There are podcasts that I see them drop and I'm like, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to listen to this. And if you've listened to this show, Office Ladies every week, every Wednesday. I think that they actually come out on Tuesday, but I don't listen to them till Wednesday morning. But oh my gosh, you better believe I look and I'm like, oh, it's Wednesday. I get a new podcast episode. I get so giddy. I get so excited. And this isn't a podcast that's really helping me in my business. This isn't a podcast that's making me money. This is a podcast that I listen to for sheer enjoyment in my life. I love it so much. It is my absolute favorite. And I just want your audience to have the same reaction. Okay, so I feel like we got a little off topic here. So hang on, let's zoom out a little bit because we've talked about experimenting, right? And how I'm going to experiment in the new year is more bonus episodes and being more strategic. And the last thing that I want to talk about is I want to have less unknowns in the new year. Now, what does this mean?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
So we've had a few conversations recently in the Profit Podcast online community. If you're not there, there's a link in the show notes. You need to come join us. This is our free Facebook group. Anybody and everybody's welcome. And I share tips and strategies and stories in there that I don't really share anywhere else. Those are like my little podcast pod, my podcast peeps in there. And I like to do a lot of fun things in there. And we're really going to ramp up our focus. You want to talk about getting more strategic. We're going to be focusing in the Facebook group in 2021, and we're going to have a lot of really cool things. So make sure that you join us in there because we're going to have some exclusive content. We're going to do some games and prizes and giveaways and just so many fun things, but you have to be part of the Facebook group in order to participate. But some of the conversations that we've had in there recently is talking about doing interviews with people that you don't really know and then having a bad experience, whether someone didn't show up, they canceled on you last minute, or you start a conversation, you're right in the middle of an interview, and then they drop an F-bomb, and you're like, oh, wait, we actually don't cuss on this show. Or they start talking about topics that you're like, what are they even talking about? Someone posted in the group and they were like, well, my guest interviewed herself for about an hour and a half. So there's that. And I just started laughing. I'm like, she interviewed herself. What does that even mean? But like the guest was just talking and then like answering your own questions and everything. So I don't want those types of unknowns on my show. But more importantly, I don't want that for you either. So I'm going to be doing more kind of practicing what you preach, in that I'm going to be putting a lot more parameters around who is actually going to be a guest on my show, but I'm also going to be sharing that information with you, because I know if I'm experiencing something in my podcast process and my interview process, that you are either experiencing it as well, like at the same time, or you will experience it at some point in your podcast journey. So I want to be doing a lot more behind the scenes, showing you what's going on in my podcast, whether it's podcast guesting, like why I accepted a certain guest, or why I said no to someone without, like, obviously I'm not going to share people's information and be like, oh, this one was a terrible pitch, I would never accept something. Like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do pitch bashing, which that sounds really bad. I'm glad I got those letters right. But I don't want to have a bunch of unknowns. I don't want to walk into a conversation or an interview that makes me uncomfortable, or makes the guest uncomfortable, or just makes it where it's a waste of time. That's really one of the biggest things for me, is I get so frustrated whenever something ends up being a huge waste of time, because that's the biggest thing, right? Like, our time is one of those huge assets that I never, ever want to waste, right? I can gamble a little bit with money, and we can do some other, like, take a little bit of a risk here and there. But when it comes down to my time, that is one boundary that is really hard to break through for me. Like, I am so strategic with how I set up my podcast interviews, how I schedule housework for myself around the house, how much like time I set aside to work out every week, spending time with my kids, because I'm a busy person and I have so many goals and ambitions and motivations in life that my time is very precious. And so I won't be saying yes to a lot of things. And that's kind of an unknown for me that feels a little scary. It does. I'm going to be very honest. I like to kind of leave a lot of room open in my schedule to say yes to fun things, but I think that I'm going to be doing less and less of that in the new year, simply because my word is 2020, or for 2021, is focus. This is my word. And it makes me a little uncomfortable to really, really say I'm not going to do new things in the new year. It makes me uncomfortable. It does, because I am the shiny objects girl. I am squirrel. Like, yeah, let's write a book about podcasting. And I did it. And let's say yes to this. Let's go guest on this podcast. Sure, I can work on that project. Yeah, I'd love to come do, like, there's a lot of things where I can get distracted because I feel like they're fun. That's really what it is for me. It's because podcasting is so much fun. And I get approached a lot about opportunities to, go talk on someone's summit about podcasting, go, teach inside this program and help them with podcasting, or like a facet of what the program is about to help them transition into podcasting. So there's a lot of things that sound like so much fun on the surface, and that they serve the purpose that I have, which is to help everybody have a podcast. But at the end of the day, my intention is to have less unknowns. And I want my schedule, my life, to be more predictable. And maybe I feel like we're going into a therapy session now, but maybe that's kind of the backlash from this year, is there were so many unknowns in this year. So many. Are the kids going to go to school? If the kids go to school, will they get sick? If my husband goes to school, if my husband goes to work, will he get sick? If we visit family, will we get sick? Will anybody get sick? What happens if you get sick? Like, there was just so much anxiety around this year that I feel like I don't want to walk into the new year with any of that if I can control it. Obviously, I can't control everything. I know this, right? Like, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can. And like, what is the last part? Like it's the serenity prayer. If you've heard it before, it's like, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? There are some things that you can control. There are some things that you can't control. And I just know that I want to have less unknowns going into the new year because maybe it's just a matter of control. I want to have a little bit more control about what's going on with this podcast, in my business, and with my family. And I know how to create some of these boundaries and some of these factors around that. So I don't have all the details to share with you like right now, right here in this episode, but I will absolutely be sharing those with this community because I think it's so important. I think I've talked about boundaries here before. I've mentioned the book before. It's Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Such a great book. But going into the new year, I just really, really want to focus. I know I've already said it like 4 times, but that's my word for the year. So I'm excited. I'm really excited. These are my intentions for the new year. I'm going to say them one more time. So I'm going to be doing some more experimenting. And I didn't really go into all the ways I'm going to be experimenting. I'm going to be experimenting with ads and different types of sponsored content and affiliate content. And y'all, I'm so excited about Buzzsprout's new dynamic content tool. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Be on the lookout because holy moly, we're going to be like, I cannot believe we haven't even talked about it more, but I didn't want to give you all the information because I know you're probably celebrating, right? It's New Year's Eve. It's the new year. Like we're going to come back hard and heavy and talk about this dynamic content tool. If you're a Buzzsprout user, go check it out because it's amazing. It is so cool. You bet your bottom dollar I'm going to have some YouTube videos, some podcast episodes, some demonstrations in our Facebook group. Like I'm going to have all the content to share about this tool because I've been waiting for it for a long time and it is incredible. I cannot wait to show you. But so experimenting, we're going to have more bonus episodes. We're going to be more strategic and I want to have less unknowns for this podcast and honestly my life in general, but you know, we're not going to get into all the personal stuff here because I've already shared too much in this episode, okay? Like all the zombie stuff, if you ever want to chat Game of Thrones, please message me. I will talk about the Targaryens and like just, I'm Team Stark all the way, 100%, Jon Snow. I mean, oh my gosh, I could talk about all the things, all the actors and actresses, like I've watched the behind the scenes videos. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, but enough about me and my Game of Thrones. I have socks. Okay. Like this is the last thing I'll say. My mom bought me last year, and I think that they were at Target. It was like the 12 days of Christmas kind of theme. And it was all these different socks from Game of Thrones. And it had all the different like house symbol. Y'all, it's another level. Okay. I feel like I feel very vulnerable right now. I'm about to start sweating because I have put myself out there as the Game of Thrones total geek. And it's okay. It's okay. Because I know someone's listening to this right now and they're like, yes, I see you. I feel you. I love it too. And I'm pumping my fist to you, friend. I hope that that's you listening. And if it's not, don't judge me. Okay. Don't judge me. It's just one of my quirks. But that is all I have for you today. If this is your first time tuning in, I would love for you to subscribe to the show and hear the other shenanigans that we talk about on this podcast every single week. So hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast. Again, the show notes for this episode are crystalprofit.com/episode 216. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of fan mail shout outs.